Gopinath Ju ki jai, Shri Gurudev ki jai, Rupanuga Guru Varika ki jai, Anantakota Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai, Gaur Tridandi. Om Timirandasya Gyananjala Shalakaya Chakshu Unmilitam Jena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Guruve Gaurachandraya Radhikaya Taralaye Krishnaya Krishna Bhaktaya Tarabhaktaya Namo Namaha Yam Pravajantamana Petyam Apeti Krityam Dvaipaino Viraha Katara Ajuhava Putreti tammayatayo taravo vinidustam sarvabhutam munimanatoshmi Bhaktya vihina aparada lakshay shiktascha karma ditarangamadye Kripa maitvam sharanam papana prinde namaste charana ravindam Bhajami radham aravinda netram smarami radham madhurashmitasyam Vadami radham karuna bharatram tato mamanasti katyena chapi. I first of all offer millions of Dandavat pranams unto the lotus feet of my beloved Gurudev. Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Astotar Sarashishima Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And the same again millions of times unto the lotus feet of our beloved Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Astotar Sarashishima Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. And all the assembled Vaishnava and Vaishnavi devotees of the Lord. Dandavat pranams. So, this morning we reached the stage of asakti, and one devotee asked the question after we had discussed so much a description of bhakti, the definition of bhakti. What had that, in a sense, got to do with asakti? I think she was feeling it was a bit out of topic or something. But we were understanding from the Siksastakam, it was saying Vidya, Vadu, Jivanam. So Vidya is knowledge. So knowledge is so important to reach these stages in bhakti. But when we have reached these stages in bhakti, we no longer need to hold on to this knowledge. I've said this repeatedly. Don't start to think that we are like jnanis or you should become like that. We purify the darkness of ignorance with the torchlight of knowledge. And when that knowledge is there, in particular, what is bhakti? So this morning we discussed the definition of bhakti. Material desires are purified completely. Gyan is also discarded, except for knowledge of Krishna, knowledge of the jiva. And karma or activities are performed only if they're in a mood of direct service to Krishna, direct bhakti. And then we discussed how these activities must be favorable. And we discussed these activities must be unbroken and unmotivated. So these are all very profound considerations or contemplations for us to understand what is Shuddha Bhakti, what is pure Bhakti. When I understand what is pure Bhakti, then I can understand my own personal level of Bhakti, or I can appreciate perhaps how my Bhakti is being compromised. And when I can understand that, how it's compromised, then of course I can attend to that. I can tighten up those areas that are needed to bring me to a more progressive place of contemplation. Now, where are we trying to come to? What is the place of consciousness we are praying for? What is the state that we're hoping for? We're wanting remembrance of Radha and Krishna, 24 hours a day. This actually is the stage of asakti. In the stage of asakti, there's no going back into the material mentality. We're constantly in a flow of remembrances of Radha and Krishna. If we're doing some particular bodily activity, still the mind is remembering the Vrindavan pastimes. It's constantly bringing these pastimes to the boil in the heart. So the acharyas have made it very simple for us, particularly Rupa Goswami. Most of our classes actually are built on the foundation of Srila Rupa Goswami's teachings. This verse this morning, Anya Vilasita Sunyam, this is written by Srila Rupa Goswami. And then the next stage after this verse, this is the beginning, the definition of bhakti. And then we need to know what is the method to practice that bhakti. So then there's another verse by Rupa Goswami. This Kriti Sadhya Bhavet Sadhya Bhav Sa Sadanabhida Nitya Siddhyasya Bhavasya Prakritam Niti Sadyate. This is such an important verse also. Gurudev would ask repeatedly if you don't have a strong memory, you can develop it. Everybody has a good memory, actually. It just needs some exercise. It's like any muscle in the brain. The memory is a muscle. If we have taken the trouble from an early age to remember verses, etc., then the muscle will be strong. If we have neglected that, it will become difficult, but still, it can be very quickly strengthened. A little application, if we just try to learn one line, or just a couple of words even, it's very helpful, because I can remember when I was first giving more classes that I didn't used to like to quote the Sanskrit, because in the Western world it seemed to be a little intimidating for the devotees. When they heard a flood of Sanskrit verses, many of them would become shy and they would start to sort of retreat. Oh my God, I can't go into that place, it's too complex, something like this. But actually I learned that the sound vibration of the Sanskrit, whether you appreciate it or not, is so purifying for the heart. It's so purifying when you hear the Sanskrit. It's like bathing the mind and consciousness in a cool, refreshing stream of water. This Sanskrit is the language of the gods. This Sanskrit is very, very beautiful. So coming from a Western world where our English or German or French or whatever language is, Russian, they're so different to the sweetness of Sanskrit. Whereas if we were Indian Hindi, it's a lot closer, it's probably easier for us. But just a little application, and we don't need to know a lot necessarily, but some key places. And these two verses, this Anyabilasata Shunyam and this Kriti Sadhya Bhavet Sadhya Bhav, this is saying that what is the focus, what must be the sadhya. If the sadhya, the goal, is very much clear and focused, then our bhakti can be very progressive. If the goal is not clear, we've been going through for the last 3 or 4 days, showing the different stages of bhakti. Anartha Nivriti, Sadhu Sangha Bhajana Kriya, Anartha Nivriti, and then Nishta, Ruchi, and now Asakti. Tomorrow we'll come into the stage of Bhav. I don't want to go to that place tonight because some devotees have been coming just regularly in the morning time, so I was going to go to the Bhav stage tomorrow morning. We can touch on it something tonight, but this verse, Kriti Sadhya Bhavet Sadhya Bhav, this is in the little verse book, and it's so helpful to know this, like a stepping stone, so to speak, that in order for our bhakti to be progressing, we need to know what is the goal. So the goal is to develop our attraction for Radha and Krishna. How can I develop that attraction? Need something on a mat or something like that. So, by the power of the Mahamantra, this will give us the energy and the enthusiasm to dive into the scriptures much more deeply. Actually, the mantra can enthuse us in whichever way we choose to go. It's not that the mantra itself is going to lead us. We have to, in a sense, guide this power or this energy that will come from the mantra. When you chant, you should try to follow some particular line of thought. If you find your line of thought or your focus is drifting away from Vrindavan into a more material place, then use some tricks to bring it back. Read a little bit, sing a bhajan, take a walk in Radha Damodar, something like this. So many things that we individually can use as a support to focus the consciousness. Reading is best. Actually, Srila Gurudev has said that in this songbook, all of the truths and siddhantas are all packed in here. If you just pick up and just say a prayer and open the book and begin to read any bhajan or any astakam, it's going to take you to a higher state of consciousness. And it's remarkable how the scriptures seem to talk to us more clearly when we're immersed in this chanting more deeply. We must try and make a program for ourselves, I've said this before, so that we can increase our chanting. Whatever we are chanting, we're always looking for that increasing place. There's no question that if you just chant a regular 16 rounds a day, it is sufficient to keep Maya Devi away, that's all. It doesn't actually carry you into a deeper state of consciousness. It doesn't take you deeper into the truths. If you can find the time to chant, say, 25 or 32 rounds in the day, it'll take us deeper and deeper. If we chant 48, it takes us even more. 64, practically speaking, we're flying. There's no more mental things operating. Actually, if there are at 64, you just go to 80. At 80 rounds, there's no more mental activity. It's just purely, you're hearing that sweet sound vibration. It's remarkable how it builds up. And living in Vrindavan, this is the greatest gift that we've ever been given, because in the very dust, as I've said before, it empowers us to do this practice of our sadhan bhajan. And if the sadhan is focused on the sadhya, so this is the next step after we've understood the definition which we described this morning. The next step is to understand what is the sadhya, what is the goal. Our goal is to develop and melt the heart in attraction for Radha and Krishna. This melting of the heart, this is the stage of bhav. This is approaching the stage of bhav. And asakti is that stage that approaches bhav. The mantra will carry us there. And careful study and progressive reading. Don't just be haphazard in your study or your reading or your practice. Take some time to carefully consider the step-by-step process and make a schedule for ourselves so that we can go along. So each day we feel, yes, I've accomplished something today. Yes, and it's progressive. Because definitely, as the body ages, we can become complacent about many things. We cannot take it so seriously, or the enthusiasm can diminish. But the mantra will always keep the enthusiasm high, but the enthusiasm must also be focused. It must be clearly, what is that sadhya? So, Srila Bhaktivedanta Thakur, he's paralleled all of these stages with the different yamas of the day, the different pastime activities in the day, to carry us into the sweetness of Braj. This stage of asakti is the stage of Madhyana Lila. This Madhyana Lila is double the time frame of any of the other yamas, or it's the same as the Ratri Leela. Actually, Krishna spends 12 hours of the day just with the gopis, and 12 hours with his mother, father, the sakas, etc., cows. So it's divided like that. Actually, Krishna spends 12 hours with the gopis during the day. So our path, ultimately, is to dwell and meditate on the sweet pastimes of the gopis. In Srimad Bhagavatam, we have Yugal Geet, we have Venu Geet, we have Brahmara Geet, we have Gopi Geet. We have these remarkable 5 life airs of the Bhagavatam, and they're all about the sweet feelings or relationships between the gopis and Sri Krishna. When we dive into these feelings, it becomes so blissful for us. The great difference, perhaps you know, but I'll say, between the Babaji line, for example, and the Gaudiya line, is that principally the Babaji line will focus on the meeting, the Milan. But the Gaudiya line gives as much emphasis to Vipralamba, the separation. When I first came to Srila Gurudev in the early 90s, we asked Gurudev, can we read the books of Anantadas Babaji? Because those were the only books that were translated into English that were available for us. This Radha Rasa Sudhanidhi, Vilap Kusumanjali, many books like this. And Gurudev said, yes, no problem, no problem. So we absorbed ourselves in those books at that time. But there's a difference, actually, in the way those books are written that we see today, because they're principally focused on just the meeting. They don't go into this heart-wrenching separation mood so much. These moods of separation, like Venugit, is actually a mood of separation. The gopis are considering the clouds to have more devotion than them, the deer to have more devotion, the cows to have more devotion, even the trees to have more devotion, the creepers. This is such a mood of deep humility. This humility is the same as praying. So this mood that the gopis are invoking in their remembrance of Krishna, in separation. Of course, the pastimes with Krishna in union are so sweet. Without the sweet meetings, how can they be separated? The two, as I said the other day, are like the two sides of the single coin. They both create the sweetest rasa for the sadhak in principle. Srila Rupa Goswami, he writes particularly in Vidagdha Madhav, and particularly in Vidagdha Madhav, how this meeting and separation is continual through the day. So in Madhyana Leela, when Krishna goes to Radha Kund, this is when he is first like free with the gopis in the day. And they perform so many joking pastimes. And they bathe in Radha Kund, they have gambling, dice games and so on. They drink honey mead. So many sweet pastimes through the day. Then at some point, Radha, she goes to worship Surya Dev at Surya Kund. Krishna again, he can't remain away from Radha, so he disguises himself as a Brahmin and conducts that ceremony right in front of Jyotila. What a prankster he is. That right in front of Jyotila, he's acting out the part of being a Brahmana. And Jyotila's completely hoodwinked. She completely thinks that yes, this is, and she rewards him even with some, she wants to give him some gold. But Madhu Mangal doesn't want gold. Madhu Mangal is his assistant, disguised also. He wants ladus. So they give him ladus in the end. But these pastimes are very, very sweet. But they become more sweet when we appreciate that after this pastime has concluded, Krishna again returns to the sakas for the Apuvarna Leela, for the afternoon Leela. So again there's separation from Sri Radha. Sri Radha again goes back to Javat, and again she's in this burning fire of separation. So to appreciate the power of this divine love, we can really appreciate it through the understanding of these periods of separation as well as the periods of meeting. So the devotees, when we take Nam, we're trying to bring those memories to the forefront of our consciousnesses. If we can do that very quickly, it seems that the material desires will start to diminish. What actually happens? Because sometimes people, when they're living in the West, they say, oh, we have no time to chant more. We have so many bills to pay, we have so many things to buy. But it's a phenomenon that if you chant more, your material desires go down. So you don't have to work so hard to make so much money to enjoy things of this world. It's a phenomenon that the more you chant, the less material desires you actually have. So the less material activity you have to actually engage in. It's like a chemistry, it's like an equation. The more you chant, then you can, after some period of time, you find that actually you have no real duties. Everyone's very satisfied with your, whatever it is, particular small duties that you do. And you find that you have so much of the day just to read and chant. Krishna wants us to do this. He wants us to find a taste for that. You can never do this in a forced way or an artificial way. You'll go crazy. Part of your active mind, your natural passion, it'll be like it's become paralyzed rather than purified. It's just like shut down. And as soon as the circumstances open again, you'll start engaging in passionate activities. It has to be a real, gradual, progressive movement. This will begin, of course, by sincere service. Service is the key. Service is the symptom of love, we said today. If we're regularly doing some service, that will purify the consciousness very quickly so that we can develop this taste for Nam. If you meet by great fortune any of the great Uttam Bhagavats, just like I remember Srila Pramod Puri Maharaj in Navadvip, he was so old at one point and he was just taking his Nam and he was telling the devotees, there is only Nam in this world. There is only Sri Nam. Please take shelter of Sri Nam. So at least if we do a regular, we've just sang in this Sad Goswami Astakam, the example of the Goswamis is the example that we want to follow. Very often Gurudev would say, try to follow in the footsteps of Raghunath and Rupa. Try to follow in their footsteps of the way they perform bhajan. Of course, our qualification is like a zero compared to them. We've come from a Western world. We've had Western sanskars since birth. We have, in a sense, so many disadvantages. But it seems to be a phenomenon that the more the disadvantage, the more desperate the sadhak becomes. I've seen many devotees who took birth in India, who have a very sattvic nature. They're living even in the mutt, but their mood of enthusiasm or greed is not as strong sometimes as a Westerner. Sometimes because we've suffered so much, we know so much pain of material difficulties, it gives us that extra desperation. That desperation can be very useful to taking shelter of Nam, because there's no question that whatever motivates us to take shelter, by taking shelter it will increase our joy or this stage from ruchi to asakti will manifest very, very quickly. So somehow or other we must pray to Krishna and Gurudev to give us the strength to take this practice more seriously. All of us want to go more. I remember one time Srila Gurudev was saying that he himself doesn't feel that he's pleasing his Gurudev sufficiently. None of us ever feel that we're doing sufficient. There's always more. This is part of the dynamic, the moving. Bhakti Devi has to be moving. She has to be like on a current. Love itself has to be growing. If we're feeling like in a family situation, some attraction, if that attraction is not growing, it becomes very flat. Similarly, our bhakti, if it's not growing steadily, I think I mentioned a few days ago how I described it as a wow. You have this experience in the day, you're reading something or today I had a wow. I went to the Radha Damodar during the Arti ceremony at 11:30. I saw you there. It was so beautiful, that ceremony. I didn't know that was the time. And I just sat spellbound, or stood spellbound watching the Arti ceremony. And I was looking at all the deities and seeing, this is Jiva Goswami's deity, Krishnadas Kaviraj, and Burgaba Goswami. Who was the fourth one? In Radha Damodar? Krishnadas Kaviraj is the tallest one. Then is Jiva Goswami. Jiva Goswami is the center. And Jaidev Goswami, yes, and Burgaba Goswami. So I was meditating on all the different acharyas, these personalities, and their beautiful deities, and seeing how beautiful was that Arti ceremony. And the whole atmosphere was so beautiful and intense. It was like a wow. It was like, an experience, touching some higher state of spiritual consciousness. And then we're always looking for that. We become greedy like the bees, looking for where is that nectarian taste. How can I have to generate the greed to actually have that taste. Sometimes it can just come by causeless mercy. But to maintain it, we have to be forming it's called chesta, our efforts. What are our efforts in our practices? So our efforts will greatly contribute to the number of wows we can have. There's probably a Sanskrit word for it. I don't know what it is. You weren't here the other day. I was describing a wow as when you have a real sort of spiritual realization, when you have some deep, profound feeling of yes, 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 like that, and you feel very deeply connected with Guru, with your devotional practice. So we're hungry for this. We become frantic for this. We become desperate. If we don't have a wow in 2 days, then we have to chant 2 lakhs or something, stay awake all night, something we have to do. This greed, we want to give wind to this fire of greed somehow or other. To quickly come to this stage of, first of all, nishta, where we're no longer flopping back into that material misconception. And then this taste is coming, and then not just a personal taste, not just this taste for my own spiritual illumination, but a taste for that object of my sadhana, a taste for Sri Radha, a taste for Nam, and then asakti, where that attachment, I cannot take myself ever away from that. There's no more going back into the material realm. And then comes Bhav. I'll just speak a little bit about Bhav now, but tomorrow we'll go in more detail. So in Bhav it's described, this Anandam Buddhi Vardhanam. This is the next jewel of Siksastakam. I don't want to go there for too long, but I'll just say something of it. But in this stage of Bhav, it's described there are 9 symptoms to recognize this stage of Bhav. And these are very beautifully described in Jaiva Dharma and in many verses. So these 9 symptoms are, first of all, it's kshantiya. Kshantiya means the mind becomes very peaceful. You're no longer concerned for any material difficulties. You know deeply that Krishna is actually arranging everything for our progress in bhakti. Whatever takes place, even if I have to leave my body, that is also going to be progressive to my next birth. I lose all fear. All fear is completely dispelled. And I can live fully in the present moment. We don't live in the present because we're not satisfied. So we're always trying to create a dream or a futuristic plan where I will be happy in the future. Therefore, we're missing the powerful present moment. This is described in the 11th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Uddhava is in a conversation with Krishna. Krishna is saying, the sadhak must come into the powerful present. It's only in the present moment that the soul is actually alive in a sense. If we're making plans for the future, if we're thinking what I'm going to do in a few hours' time or a few weeks' time or a few months' time, more than I'm fully conscious of what's happening at this very moment, then I haven't got all of my faculties operating at this instant. When I can bring it down to the very present moment, the powerful present, the devotee prays to live in the powerful present, so he can stay there when this feeling of kshantiya, peacefulness, is there. It's like Srila Gurudev. We would see that anyone who came to speak to Gurudev, Gurudev would turn to him and focus his undivided attention on that person. There was nothing else going on except you. For that maybe 1 minute, maybe 30 seconds, maybe 10 seconds, maybe 5 minutes, there would be no other consideration in his mind. You could sense that absolute presence of Srila Gurudev. It was so enlivening for us to be in that sort of exchange with Gurudev. Even when Gurudev would get off the podium and walk through, we would all be looking for his glance. Because if he looked at us just for a second, he was right there in that moment. And he was seeing our highest state of consciousness. And he would invoke that state of consciousness by his mercy. So we were all hankering for that merciful glance. But this understanding of the powerful present is very important. When we can live in the present moment, then there's no worries. It's like, for example, the materialist gives an example, like if you're on a canoe, in a canoe, and you're on a river, and you're going along and it's very beautiful on the banks and so on, trees and creepers, but you're worried because you're thinking maybe around the corner is a, waterfall. What do you call them?
Waterfall or rapids.
Rapids. Maybe there's some danger around the corner. So you can't really be peaceful in the present because you're thinking there's going to be danger in the future. But this is what the trick of the mind does. It makes us insecure about the present moment. It's called Maya Devi. It's called illusion. Why does that happen? Because I'm very attached to my material situation. That's why it happens. When detachment from my material situation starts to grow in the heart, then it doesn't really matter what's going to happen in the next 20 minutes or half hour or 1 week or 2 weeks. It no longer matters anymore. At this moment, I want to put my consciousness fully into absorption of seva to Sri Radha and Krishna. And the power of the name will carry us into that place. So this stage of kshantiya is the first stage of bhav. And then the next stage is called avyakta kalatvan. This means I don't waste a second. I value this precious birth, because in this birth I have access to Sri Gaurasundara. I have had access to a Mahabhagavat, an Uttam Bhagavat. I've been in the company of devotees. Right now we're all living in Vrindavan. How valuable is that? How do we know in next birth those same advantages are going to be there for sure? We don't have to worry about that. But at this point, everything is completely auspicious for my spiritual progress. So I become completely absorbed in trying to utilize the moments that are left to me in this birth. Perhaps I have 1 year, 10 years, 20 years, who knows? But whatever amount of time I want to utilize to its maximum. And this is a wonderful exercise for us. You know, we write the whole day's activities down. I mean, it's like a science to begin with. And we can start to shave off those times in the day when we're not really focusing properly, when we're not really active in our devotion, those slumps in the day, perhaps after we've just eaten a big meal, perhaps we need to take a rest, whatever, but we know ourselves, we have to sort of look at that, look at our schedule, examine it, write it down. Personally, I can remember I wrote down when I was living first in Vrindavan, so many different schedules for my day. I would write it down and then follow that for 10 days and then tighten it up and then follow it for 10 days, then tighten it again and then put in this. I would put space out time in there. I would put time for socializing, etc. But I'd have a schedule, I'd follow. So there would never ever come a time in the day when I'd think, what am I going to do now? There would never be a time in the day for that. It would all be very smoothly progressing. And then I could read so much. Even if you read one particular book for like 10 minutes, 15 minutes in a day, 5 minutes in a day, 3 minutes in a day, by the end of a month, you'll have covered so much ground. So these are very helpful tools. So this avyakta kalatvam, not wanting to waste a second of my time, my valuable, precious time. And then the next stage, viraktiya. Viraktiya means, this is detachment. So there are 3 types of detachment. There is monkey detachment, markata vairagya. There is, I described this the other day, falgu vairagya, and like samsara vairagya it's described. This is like an impersonal detachment. We are following the path of yukta vairagya, where we're utilizing all of our resources for the glorification of Krishna. So this detachment will come very strongly in the heart in the stage of bhav. And then following vairagya is manasunyata. This pride becomes somewhat purified. So these are the stages of bhav, and they're enumerated very clearly. And then ashabandha samutkanta. Ashabandha means great hope. Samutkanta means with great enthusiasm. Then namagana sadaruchi, having a great desire for chanting nam. This also comes in the stage of bhav. Then ashaktis tat gunat kine, that great attachments, ashaktis, for Krishna's qualities and pastimes. This is the 8th stage of bhav. The 9th stage of bhav is priti stad vishate stale, that great attachment and attraction to Krishna's pastime places. When I go to those pastime places, I'm remembering Radha and Krishna very easily. It's like in Vrindavan, there are so many, especially where we're living here. We've just got Imli Tal next door. We just have to look at Imli Tal and remember that pastime. When Krishna, he left Sri Radha at the height of their union, walking through the forest. And then she became tired. She said, I don't mind if you take me to a flower bed or if you just keep on walking in the forest. She said, it's okay, I don't mind where you take me. And the acharyas described that at this point, their bhavs had become like equal. Prior to that, Krishna was in a submissive mood, and Sri Radha was the heroine. This heroine's mood is called Swadina Bhartika. She had controlled her lover. And when one is controlling and one is submissive, there's lots of ras in the relationship. But when they both suddenly become the same, then there's no waves. So when Krishna, who was in a submissive mood to Radha, asked Radha where she wanted to go, did she want to go to a flower bed or did she want to keep walking in the forest? Then Radha, she says, I don't mind where you take me. You can take me to a flower bed or a walk in the forest like this. So all of a sudden their moods have become the same. So this is when Krishna left. Krishna left Radha for many reasons. Just next door at Sringaravat. Sringaravat, we're surrounded. This circle that surrounds this temple is remarkable. It's astonishing. So we have Imli Tal just next door, then Sevakunj, then Radha Damodar, then Sringaravat. All these really... Where?
Dangali and Mangali.
Dangali, Mangali, Prem Gali. All these gullies just right here. Yamuna there. How can we move away from these high conceptions of the sweetness of Radha and Krishna's pastime? We have to have our eyes wide open being able to absorb these. So through our practice, if we perform this sadhan bhajan, now we are ajati rati sadhaks. Perhaps I am anyway, maybe you are jati rati sadhak. But the jati rati sadhak is that one who's already in the stage of bhav. But if we're not in that stage of bhav, we need just to roll through the process regularly and just refresh everything to see, yes, how much on track am I? Where is my reading going? Is my reading very clearly defined? Am I regularly tasting some of the very sweet, beautiful pastimes between Radha and Krishna every day? I will taste them so much more deeply if I'm chanting sufficiently. If I'm not chanting sufficiently, the taste won't be there so strong, and I'll become distracted. You know what happens when you don't chant? You start to believe that all the various material difficulties are real. This is what happens. You start to believe that I really do have some problems if you don't chant. And as soon as you chant sufficiently, you realize, well, these are all just temporary waves. They're coming here today, they're gone tomorrow, they'll be gone by next week. You appreciate that, and it's not such a trauma to undergo any sort of problem, so to speak. But if we're not chanting, then we start to think, oh, all these are real, that I really do have big problems. So this is what happens. It's, you know. So to hear about these things, I think, is encouraging for our absorption in Nam. Okay. I wanted really in the evening to hear any questions from you. I was just going to speak for a little while and then hope that you would ask me some questions that we could examine more closely, because I want to know what are your levels of thinking. If I'm just speaking something, I don't know exactly how much it's computing with you entirely. So I need to know there needs to be some exchange, really, to some degree, for some juice to continue. Does anyone at all have any question about, we've discussed so many topics in the last 4 or 5 days, and we've touched on quite a few of the pastime, lila, periods of the day. We've talked about Nishanta Lila, Prata Lila, Purvana Lila, Madhyan Lila. A little bit I've described Madhyan Lila. Madhyan Lila is endless. We can actually read so much of it. Today, that young man, what's his name? Thakur, he went to the printers to print up a lot of papers for you all. And one of those papers describes these 8 periods of the day, and it gives us a short description of actually what is happening there. And then from that brief description, you can go to other scriptures and you can fluff it out. You can make it more clear and deep. Yes?
You just described the view or the approach of the Bhavaji's line to certain Krishna or Krishna as compared to Gopinath. Could you say the difference is that they are just taking it's very roughly speaking, they're taking the fun part and we're not leading Krishna even when he's not so happy.
Yes.
Would it be the right vision to say that? They just want to enjoy what he's enjoying, so to say, and as a Gaudiya
I think it's a very deep...
You go even, whatever happens to Krishna, you want to be with him.
Yeah. But that separation mood takes us into union ultimately. This was described during the parikram. When Sri Radha is in Uddhav Kher and Krishna has been away for 90 years, her mood, intense absorption in Krishna is almost higher than when she's actually with Krishna. That intensity, like Prem Vaititya at Prem Sarovar, that mood. The Babajis, they just choose to not discuss so much emphasis on the separation. But in the Gaudiya line, we discuss 50-50, really. And I don't think it's quite like you described. I think it's, of course we stay with Krishna, even in his separation. Just like Krishna stays with us. But actually in that separation it becomes a more intense type of union. When Radha is really burning in separation, it feels to her that she is entirely with Krishna. I think these are things for our internal development, to appreciate and to have experience of these truths. I think it's a little difficult to describe.
I'm asking because there's
Yeah.
quite, even now, you said that you were asking Gurudev to read another dozen Babaji's books.
Yes, yes.
Even
yes.
now, there's quite some attraction of some devotees to that type.
We love to hear both.
Yeah.
We love to hear both. We love to hear the pastimes. We go to Javat. When we sit in Javat with the devotees, we hear so many pastimes. Krishna in the box. We hear Krishna, Radha being bitten by a snake. We hear, what are those other, Chandrika? What is it?
Chamatkara Chandrika.
What are the other stories? That's two.
The doctor.
The doctor, yes. And what about Prem Samput also? This is such a beautiful pastime about the union between Radha and Krishna. So there are these so beautiful meeting pastimes, but the separation pastimes are also there. So the devotees, we take both, and at different times we get relish from different...
Who wrote another Vrindavan Shampoo?
Yes, yes.
Who wrote that?
That was Krishnadas Kaviporn. Yes,
He
Kaviporn.
didn't want to hear about
No,
separation,
no,
anything
no,
like that.
no. And he was just worshipping Krishna. This is what Chaitanya Mahaprabhu would love, because Mahaprabhu was in a mood of Radha, and he wanted to worship, she wanted to worship Krishna. So she wanted just to hear that about Krishna. But the sadhaks, they want to hear about Sri Radha's moods. When Sri Radha, she's with Lalita in the forest, and before she's actually had the full-blown meeting with Krishna in Purvarag, she hears the flute. Vishaka and Lalita, they take her to a grove where they know Krishna is, and she hears this flute, and immediately she loses her composure, and she just feels that that flute sound is absolutely everything. She's become absorbed. Then Lalita, she says, oh, Sri Radha has fallen into the trap, the hunter's trap. The hunter has played his flute, and now Radha has fallen into that trap. And then Radha becomes very confused and bewildered. She feels this attraction to Krishna, but the attraction to the flute song also becomes, in the same way, so strong. So there's so much movement of her emotions here. So when we're in our meditation, we're contemplating all these different moods of Radha very beautifully. Do you have any more questions on these topics? Or shall I ask you questions now? Yes. What?
You mentioned about chanting more. Sometimes we find ourselves in a situation where we have some kind of seva responsibilities like publications and management. And, Gurudev may encourage us to take some responsibility, and these things may weigh on our head, and we feel like
we always have to, he's asking the question, sometimes we may have so much seva, so many responsibilities to do. How can I actually give more time to my chanting when I have so much responsibility? Like Padabja Prabhu, he's responsible for that whole Pure Bhakti website. He's responsible for so many devotees in far-flung places getting nourishment actually from that website. They're depending on him. So this is a responsibility that he has to fulfill, but still his desire should always be, as soon as I get some extra time, or can I make some extra time? Because actually, by an increased chanting, your intelligence will work more clearly. You will know how to do something more efficiently. If you don't chant, it'll take you 1 hour to do something. And if you have chanted sufficient rounds, it might take you 20 minutes. You'll see right through. Your mind won't become distracted at all. This is what the power of Nam can do. Sometimes you might start off the day and you think you have 20 things to do. And you begin chanting, and after a while you realize you only have actually 10 things really important to do. You chant a little more, then you realize, well, actually I can get away with just 5. And you can do those things really efficiently. So it's not ever that our seva should be minimized, because we're praying for service. We want to engage. If we've been bestowed service like that, this is a great wealth. This is our wealth, our service. So we should take it very seriously. But our service is also to Nam. This is going to empower my consciousness. Without that, we can always get, there's nothing happening. You don't need to work between 4:30 and 6:30. That can't be a time. And in the late evening, working with computers and so on, we have to make a regulated cutoff point. And I believe that you can become much more efficient in your seva. So it's a question of individually learning how to balance that. Srila Gurudev sometimes would chant 1 or 2 lakhs on a plane. I've seen Gurudev one time on Guru Purnima in Mathura. He got up and then he said his anik, and then immediately the doors were open and a huge crowd of people came in at about 4:30 in the morning, and he was busily engaged with those people. Then he did his Guru Puja, and the entire rest of the morning he was just seeing people and accepting their worship. And then he took some prasadam and he lay down for about half an hour, and then again he was in the temple room. If you remember, in Gopinath in Mathura, they divide the temple. They put like bamboos, so there's a crowd flow, because so many people want to come and get Gurudev's blessing on this day. And Gurudev sits on a bed like this and just sees person after person after person after. They're queued up right around the whole temple, coming to see him. And I've seen him go from 5 o'clock in the morning through till 9:30 at night without a break in his seva. So this is the Guru or the Uttam's example of seva. This doesn't diminish. He could not do that seva unless the day before or prior he had chanted so much in his own personal life. Gurudev often described 40 years ago in his life, he would chant so much. He developed that thirst, that absolute greed for Radha and Krishna. So it has to happen simultaneously. We have to balance it. We have to become really sensible. We want to satisfy those devotees we're serving and perform our service properly, but we can do it best if we ourselves are satisfied. This is the truth. What were you going to say, Kali?
Oh, it's just been my experience that whatever nature or propensity I feel influenced by has also determined whatever seva I have been engaging in, or what engagements I have been given. Whether I have been responding to it or not responding to it, whether I thereby have taken responsibility or have been feeling responsibility for it, actually have carried it out, whatever I've been asked of Gurudev or other devotees to engage in, that there's always a balance between my own propensities and the seva that I'm actually engaging in.
Yeah.
And when that changes, then also the seva is changing.
Yeah. One time when one devotee, He was just sharing his own appreciation, more or less. It wasn't a question as such. It was like a expression of support, in a sense, for what we were saying. I remember one time when there was one devotee and he was translating this Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu Bindu for Gurudev. And he wasn't chanting sufficiently. And Gurudev brought him into the temple to live in Mathura Math and said, first you chant 64 rounds a day before you even begin your translation. How can you translate this topic if you're not chanting sufficiently? How will you understand what it is that you're trying to translate? He understood this was such an important book. What sort of, flavor was that translator going to put into that edition unless he was properly Krishna conscious himself? Guru can empower so much, but also we have to be. See, it's not so difficult to chant. We simply just have to go to bed early. That's the secret. That's the key. The key starts in the evening time. If you take rest between 9 and 10, then you can get up between 3 and 4. It's not difficult. If you take rest at 10:30, 11, then how are you going to get up? And according to our metabolism, our eating habits should be, looked at to see, if I eat too much, is that going to make me sleep too long? We have to figure these kind of things out. And we can, work it out so that we have more time. It's not so difficult. So we can sing one bhajan. You like to play? Hari Nama Chua Aneka Swarupa. 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 Yashodanandana Ananda Bhagana Nandanaya Rasa Kuma.